Hello and welcome back to you, my brilliant students. If you are watching this video, then hopefully you've already seen Booker's 7 Basic Plots Part 1. If you haven't, you need to go ahead and stop what you're doing right now and go back and watch that first video, because I'm going to cover a lot of things that are super important and generally going to influence the rest of the lesson here. But just to remind you, this is an overview of Booker's 7 Basic Plots as a means of literature analysis and construction. So not only do I want you to be able to analyze a story through these means, but I'm also going to ask you to construct one. Let's go ahead and pick up where we left off. We actually left off on one of the simpler ones, which is comedy. And comedy, rather than having 5 stages, only has 3. Comedy typically takes a light and humorous tone with a sympathetic character that triumphs over adversity. It is important to realize that the comedy is more than just humor, so it's more than just jokey ha ha, as events become more and more confusing, but they lead to a single clarifying moment. So comedy basically means there is going to be a happier ending rather than a sadder ending. Things are going to be better for the protagonist and everyone involved rather than worse. And that's one of the marks of a comedy. So every romantic comedy that you've ever seen, whether it be on the Hallmark Channel or whatever, is an example of a comedy. A Midsummer Night's Dream is one. Much Ado About Nothing. Shakespeare loved writing comedies. He was actually particularly good at it. He loved especially using disguises and mistaken identities, and that confusion, the disguise and the mistaken identity, is really the mark of a comedy. Is whenever there is a misunderstanding, or whenever characters don't understand one another or confuse one another, that is a comedy. Bridget Jones's Diary, 4 Weddings and a Funeral is a wonderful example of that, as well as Toy Story, actually. And I think I used Toy Story as my example. So, there is only 3 parts to this one, and that is the first one is Under the Shadow. So you have a small and intimate world, or a small and intimate community, for example, in the case of Toy Story, Andy's Toys, and they are under the shadow of confusion. People are shut away from one another through uncertainty, through frustration. That shadow falls over Andy's Toys whenever a brand new toy ends up showing up, and his name is Buzz Lightyear. It's really weird because this guy doesn't know that he's a toy. He thinks he's an actual space ranger, right? So whenever the confusion heightens, that's whenever the knot begins to tighten. All right, so things begin to become more and more there's more and more on the line. Things get more and more risky. For example, Woody tries to actually knock Buzz out of the window, and they both end up on a ride to Pizza Planet. Okay, and it's at its most acute, and everyone is in this nightmarish tangle of confusion, misinterpreting or misunderstanding other people's motives and meaning, culminated in whenever Woody and Buzz end up over at Sid's house, and Woody tries to use Bud's hand to convince the other toys at Andy's that everything is okay. And of course, you know how that turns out. They're like, "What are you trying to pull?" And he's like, "Nothing." And they're like, "Oh God, you killed him." And so they shut Woody out forever, and Buzz ends up getting a rocket strapped to his back, and the resolution only comes after that knot has been completely pulled, the rocket has been lit, and there is this coming to light of things that is not previously recognized. Buzz realizes that he's actually a toy. Woody realizes that he's not actually threatened by Buzz, and that he will always be one of Andy's toys. Perceptions dramatically change in this one epiphanal moment. Shadows are dispelled, so the small community is suddenly transformed, and everyone sees that Woody is not this evil guy that killed Buzz. Right? This little world of protagonists is brought together into a state of union, of understanding, and they all end up moving with Andy and living happily ever after. That's a comedy. That's just how it goes. It goes under the shadow, people are confused, tightening the knot, people get more confused, even to the point to where it's there's straight up aggression or violence, right? And then that knot gets pulled so far that all of a sudden everything is unraveled and the resolution just kind of falls into place. There you go. There's your comedy. The next bit is going to be the dynamic opposite of this, and tragedy is a full reversal of overcoming the monster. So you remember how in overcoming the monster, there's this distant threat that is approaching, the odds are stacked against the hero, and then the hero is able to overcome the monster. In this one, the hero is oftentimes the monster. The hero is the one who gets stronger and stronger and stronger until finally they get brought to this climax and everything falls apart out from underneath them, only to realize too late that they have become the corrupted ones. They are justly destroyed at the end of the story. So you can think of this in terms of Macbeth, A Picture of Dorian Gray, Julius Caesar, and many others wherein the protagonist, the main character, ends up going through a fall from grace, okay? So the stages of this one, there are 5 of them. The first one is the anticipation stage, and that is whenever the protagonist is this tragic hero that believes something is missing and they want it. In the case of Macbeth, he wants to become a king. Okay. In the case of Julius Caesar, Brutus wants justice and freedom to reign over Rome. So this could be anything. It could be power, it could be fame, it could be a love interest, or it could be something else. The Count of Monte Cristo is also another really good example of this because Edmond Dantes gets falsely imprisoned, right? And his motivation is to enact his revenge on all of the people who did him wrong and eventually get his long-lost love Mercedes back. Okay, but this motivation is what sets up the events for the protagonist's fall. The dream stage is whenever the tragic hero sets out on their path to obtain their desires, and there's no turning back. Once they start doing this, things start to go strangely well for them at first, okay? This is usually something along the lines of they murder someone, they steal or embezzle something. There is like this line that up until this point they have not crossed, but because of their tragic flaw, like they cross that line and no one's calling them on it yet, okay? No one can either stop them or no one is willing to stop them. And our tragic hero just proceeds further and further going, well, you know what? Everything seems to be going okay. I'm Macbeth. I just killed King Duncan, and now they're making me king. Well, why would I stop? See what I mean? The frustration happens whenever things begin to get a little bit more difficult and things begin to unravel for them. So there might be small annoyances, like, I don't know, your best friend's ghost showing up at your dinner table. But in dealing with them, the protagonist commits like additional dark acts, okay? So he ends up killing his best friend, and he ends up going and slaughter, like Macbeth ends up slaughtering this entire family of nobles, including like the wife and kid, right? And so these additional dark acts truly seal their fate and alert the reader that this can only end badly in the long run. Okay, I think of the fall of Anakin Skywalker in Episode 3, whenever Anakin crosses a line and then he crosses another. He crosses to the first line with Mace Windu, and then he crosses another whenever he goes to the Jedi Temple and destroys that one. Right? Yeah. So how does that start? How does that end up going with the nightmare stage? Well, the way that this goes is that the tragic hero's plan begins to unravel, and they can sense that this opposing force is beginning to close in. Fate is coming for them, or you know, like all of those people that you killed, Macbeth, yeah, they had family members, and now they're all super mad at you, okay? So they get increasingly paranoid, they live in fear of what is to come, and they lean more and more heavily on their tragic flaw, whether that was originally greed or their love, like their love interest or whatever it is. And there's this final climactic battle that inevitably, because it's a tragedy, the hero loses. And so in the resolution, it's not that the hero wins. In our resolution, the conflict is resolved by them breathing their last or losing, okay? So whether that's at the hands of their enemies or due to some final act of violence, either way, their death isn't mourned very much because the darkness that surrounded them is suddenly dissipated, okay? And now order is restored because your hero, your main protagonist, has actually fallen. All right. And that's how a tragedy goes. You can tell a comedy or a rags to riches because oftentimes your protagonist starts off like super low and then they end up building and building and building. But in tragedy, your protagonist is like way up here and everything is awesome. And then things get a little bit more awesome and then they end up way down lower. Okay? That's kind of how those two things work. The final one is rebirth, and this is one of my favorite ones. This is whenever an event occurs which forces the character to be changed in a dramatic way, often to become a better or a new person. Frog Prince is included in this, Beauty and the Beast, I think I use A Christmas Carol with Ebenezer Scrooge, Groundhog Day falls into this, Les Miserables falls into this, many different things fall into this, and it's about the character going through this transformation as they have an internal conflict throughout the entire story. That internal conflict is the main conflict, but it's often mirrored by external conflicts as well. Okay? So, the anticipation stage in this one is whenever your young hero or heroine falls under the shadow of a dark power. In the case of like Sleeping Beauty, in the case of Beauty and the Beast, in the case of like a lot of the Disney ones like Snow White, you fall under like a dark spell. Okay, and so that's the anticipation stage. All right, is like there's this dark shadowy power, this dark shadowy force, and for a while things might seem to be going okay. The threat may have receded. Maybe the witch or the fairy left. Maybe the witch or the fairy went, and they are now in charge of the kingdom, and everything is like ordered and peaceful. But like, there's this approaching shadow, and it's not until the frustration stage whenever the threat or the darkness or the evil returns in full force, right? That's whenever the hero or the heroine is seen imprisoned in the state of living death. Okay, so in the case of the hero or the heroine, Sleeping Beauty is cast under the spell of sleep, or Snow White is put to sleep, or Prince Adam is watching the roses fall, the petals fall from his rose as his transformation into a beast is beginning to become more and more and more complete. And that threat there is whenever the frustration approaches. Okay. The next bit is the nightmare stage, and that's whenever the threat continues for a long time. That's whenever the dark power seems to have completely triumphed. All right, Gaston is going, and he's going to kill the beast because he sees the beast as like this scapegoat for all of the things that are going wrong in this little French village, right? And the beast has basically given up. The beast has, like, he's lost his internal conflict. It seems like he's just given everything up, and there's not going to be a redemption for him. However, in the resolution, that is whenever a redemption comes. Redemption means saving, okay? Redemption means pulling out someone from evil or sin or darkness and bringing them to light, okay? And so there's this miraculous redemption, and so if it's the hero who's imprisoned, okay? Like, if the hero is imprisoned, then the hero is saved, all right? But if the main protagonist is not imprisoned, then they're the ones who has to go do the saving. Does that make sense? So if you are the main character and you've been imprisoned by an evil witch in the story, like, someone comes and help you. Whereas in the case of like Beauty and the Beast, like Prince Adam, who has fallen under this shadow, is actually saved by Belle. Okay, and so it can be a young woman or a child, and the reason why it's oftentimes a young woman or a child, it doesn't have to be, but the reason why it oftentimes is because these are archetypal symbols of innocence, okay? And so whatever is approaching you is either going to redeem you by their courage, or they're going to redeem you by their innocence or by their purity. That's how the original Beauty and the Beast went. That's actually how Tangled ends, with Flynn Rider saving Rapunzel and cutting her hair. That's actually how The Frog Prince ends. That's actually how Sleeping Beauty as well as Sleeping Beauty as well as Snow White, they all end in that same way, where someone, by their virtue, redeems the person that they're trying to save. And that, my students, is rebirth. Now, remember, your assignment is to write your own short story. So I want you to write out what your anticipation stage is going to look like. Write out who your main characters and protagonists are. What is their dream stage going to look like? Now, if you're going to go with a Voyage and Return, the anticipation stage is going to be your protagonist falling into a world somehow. Well, tell me what that world is going to be like. Tell me the things that are going to be strange and fascinating. What are the things that they're going to discover in the dream stage that is going to make them more curious? And then what is going to be scary when they go into the frustration stage, right? What is going to be the threat when they get to the nightmare stage? Go ahead, and if you're going to do overcoming the monster, tell me what the call to action is for your protagonist, and write it there in the form. That way, whenever you begin writing your 2 to 4 page story, you'll have something to go off of. That's the idea that I want for you. So I want this assignment, I want this anticipation stage, dream stage, frustration stage. I want this worksheet filled out by Friday, and then I'll want your stories by the upcoming Wednesday. Okay? So best of luck to you, my brilliant students. If you need any help, just go ahead and ask me or rewatch these videos. And I absolutely have the utmost confidence that you're going to do amazing at this assignment. Good luck, and don't stop learning, my brilliant students.